What's up, guys? Welcome back to the channel. Here with another video, part two. The video before it was about the state of VR VR hardware in 2025. Today is about software. These two videos go hand in hand because you can't talk about hardware without software and software without hardware. And before I continue, these are just my perspective and things that I've noticed. Just because something is positive doesn't mean everything is fine and dandy. Just because something's negative doesn't mean it's the end of VR or that VR is dead. And I'll try to avoid being overly positive and overly negative. It's just, again, these are just some thoughts and things that I've noticed, positive and negative. Generally, just things when you point something out that's wrong or an issue that you notice, especially with VR, you're just pointing it out for the betterment of it. I'm not sitting here crapping on it and I don't know what I'm talking about, or I'm just complaining or saying I'm going to quit, YouTube or VR YouTube or whatever it is, or I'm done with VR. It's just some of the things that I've noticed. And I've been a active VR user for almost 10 years now. First VR headset I officially tried was in 2016, but I'm not going to get too much into that. I've already mentioned in the last video, but if you haven't watched that, just want to give you that preface a little bit. So a little bit about the software in VR. It's a lot different than, it's a lot different than looking at it from the hardware perspective, because essentially software is what sells a lot of the hardware, and that's the things that we're going to be using or, using the most with our VR headsets. Obviously, it's the things that, make us rush to go buy a headset that has an exclusive feature, an exclusive, exclusive video game or whatever it is. And there's been a lot more VR software in the last few years, which is really awesome and really great. Positive and negatives, both of it. And there's been so many games, even mods. Mods have been carrying VR for a lot, especially in the PCVR scene. And the amount of software compared to where we first started with VR 10 years ago, it's crazy good. There's so many creative ideas, so many creative things compared to where we were 10 years ago. The possibilities of VR software, it's only growing. And as the hardware got better, the games got better, the immersive experiences, the popularity, and a lot more devs start jumping into, making VR games. Current studios and a lot of new studios start popping up, even outside of the States, internationally. So that's really, really good. And software is, I would say, in a somewhat good place. There are some things that are, concerning a little bit that we'll go into. And there's a lot of ups and downs. But, I think we're in a pretty good spot with software. There's a lot of options, a lot of video games. VR software and video games come in waves. All of a sudden, there'll be, 2-3 games in 1 month. All of a sudden, there's probably 6 months of no big, good releases. And then some years are better than others. Last 6 months, we had a lot of good games that come out. A lot of big, I would say AAA status for VR came out last year. And some years there have been a few months or half a year where it's been a drought. So that's kind of the thing that I've noticed with VR. Even this even goes for mods especially as well. Like there's always mods, but there's not as many mods that like are eye catching, or like that make things, a huge impact into the VR space. That's kind of the thing that I've noticed, which there's only several studios that are making VR games. A lot of really small indie studios, probably I would say a little bit more, there's only a few big budget, strictly VR studios that are doing things. And there's a lot of, one-man team, 3-man teams, 5-man teams. That's where the space is right now. That's kind of like the issue that I think is the most, along with the resources, which is normal. But again, I would just really hope things are a little bit more consistent. It keeps us excited and using our devices, because some people will buy a headset for a few softwares, and all of a sudden there's nothing. It's for casual users, by the way. There's nothing, and then all of a sudden they just put their headset down, forget about it, and just don't keep up with it. And it kind of just keeps the user base up and down. That's not always the case, but that is something that I've noticed. Another thing that I've noticed is that this is the biggest issue that we've had in the last several years. There's this constant tug and pull between PCVR and standalone VR, mainly just the Quest series. I mean, there is the Pico series outside the States, and it's made its way into the States for people who buy it off secondhand market. But mainly just standalone and PCVR. PCVR, you're going to get as essentially the best performance and graphical experience you can get for VR, while the Quest or standalone, you're going to have the most the best the largest user base actually right now for VR for a studio to make as much money and accessibility, and there's less barrier to entry because I don't have to buy a headset and a PC. Not everyone's going to have both or even have a PC good enough to run VR. There are different options, but not everyone's going to go ahead and get both together. So there's a lot more standalone. But there's a huge PC VR space with a lot of people who have PCs. I mean, people don't realize a lot of modern laptops can run VR games very, very well. I've done a video where I've done a 2070 laptop, and it ran Half-Life Alyx very well. It's not going to be max settings, but it's still a very enjoyable experience. People don't really realize that there's a lot of mini PCs and everything, but that's a whole different topic. The fact that there's a split between the Quest 3 and the PCVR, there's a huge gap in development, because I understand for studios they don't have unlimited resources, and they're going to have to focus on profitability and getting their games to the most users possible, the largest user base possible, and that's usually the Quest 3. And now we're noticing people or studios have a release for both at the same time, or there'll be a staggered release where it's okay, first is the Quest and the PCVR, or PCVR for early access and then Quest 3 later on. That's an issue of resources, which is understandable for a lot of studios, especially in a industry that's still growing. And there's a lot more risk and a lot less, install base compared to regular flat screen console gaming and PC gaming. With that risk and limited resources, there's going to be less time, or a more difficult time, developing for both at the same time. And we've seen it over and over again where a game will come out for both PCVR and Quest 3, and it'll perform really bad on the Quest 3 and really well on the PCVR, or vice versa. Whether that is just an optimization issue, they haven't spent enough time on a certain build, or they were just rushing it because they have to get it hit the deadline and they weren't able to optimize it for both, or whatever the case is. Then that's a very common issue that we're noticing, where studios are trying to release for both at the same time. But also, again, if they release at a staggered release, if they release it for the Quest 3 first, most of the people are going to just buy it for the Quest 3 and not buy it again for PCVR. Then people point again, okay, oh, look, our PCVR sales are low because no one's buying it for the PCVR. We bought it more at the Quest. Well, you released the Quest version first. A lot of people might not want to wait for the PCVR version. If I have a Quest 3 and a PC game, I want to just play it now. And vice versa. You release on PCVR first, people get it. People probably forget about it later down the line when it comes on the Quest 3. Oh, our sales are not doing too well on Quest 3. There's a lot of different factors, and it's a marketing thing, it's a business thing. That's kind of the two issues that you notice, and there's no perfect solution. It's just the dynamic of the industry right now. This is not really an ultra negative or ultra positive. This is just something that I know has hindered sales for certain studios. We just saw Fast Travel Games lay off a bunch of people in their studios because of their sales not being too high, even though they released a lot of games. Right now, we're talking about multiplayer games. I feel like we haven't been fully tapped into that market yet. In the VR industry, we have our Ghost of Tabors, our Pavlovs, our Contractor Showdowns, and a bunch of other games that are multiplayer, even some MMOs. But we saw, I think the other day, I just saw an MMO that's VR based that shut down their servers because there's not enough enough players playing. And even with some of the big FPS games, the player base shoots up and then just dies down really quick after a big update or something new, or a new game comes out. After a month or two, people just let go of it. Now, there's a lot of different reasons that happens. Sometimes some of the games release an update or make a change, it breaks the game, people don't like it, or there's not enough, to keep people interested. And then the multiplayer VR market is still a lot smaller compared to the single player game. I feel like that potential still hasn't been tapped into yet. The single player games have been doing really, really well, but the multiplayer one is still kind of struggling. Don't get me wrong, the games are still fun, but we haven't had that big moment where this is a really consistent good multiplayer game where there's the masses rushing to it. I mean, you have Gorilla Tag, but and you have VR chat, but we're talking about getting the traditional flat screen game into VR, our FPSs, our MMOs, and everything. there's still room and potential for it, but right now the issue with multiplayer VR games, the player base is small and it's up and down. Even just flat screen multiplayer games are struggling, but now imagine how VR multiplayer games are going to be struggling because of the player base compared to flat is a lot less. There are still players, you can still find games, but I feel like the potential we haven't really reached the point where it needs to be right now. Now, those are some of the things that I just noticed. This is what I really, really hope. Just like for the VR hardware, I really hope there's a lot more innovation for some of these games. Another thing that I've noticed, we've had a lot of really good releases. We have a lot more software, we have a lot more options. So that's just really, really positive. But the other side that I've been noticing too is that some of these games that are releasing from large to small, they're kind of copy paste games, which I understand. There's probably different reasons. Maybe developers are still, hey, we hit a certain point. We can't take as many big jumps and leaps anymore because, as the devs are learning to make games more immersive, or there's a hardware restriction or whatever it is. There are some things that I'm noticing that some of these devs are maybe taking shortcuts or just creating cookie cutter games. There's not as many wow moments in some of these games as much anymore. I mean, I feel like a broken record amongst every other YouTuber out there that loves VR and talks about VR. Half-Life Alyx is a much older game. Now, it is funded by Valve. They have a lot more money and everything. But it's not always about the graphics. There are different aspects of VR that make things very immersive. We had a couple releases. Actually, we just had another release, Arc and Ages right now, and people are loving it. I haven't had a chance to play it yet, but based off what I'm seeing people talk online, it has that wow moment where, people are enjoying the game. There are immersive aspects of it. And some of these VR games are just copy pasting what other people have done, or they're just making basic immersive games. We've some of the people that are already in the, VR space, and most people have tried a VR game already. They've tried their Beat Sabers, their Super Hots and all of that. We need something a little bit more. We can't just keep making the same thing over and over and over again. I understand that you might tweak some things here and there, but we're talking about the grand scheme of things where thinking more forward, we need things a little bit more immersive, creative, and innovative. That will also be reliant on the hardware. Don't get me wrong, it's not only the devs' faults. There are some hardware limitations because there's a big gap between the Quest 3 and PCVR. They're not gonna make a game strictly for PCVR and dump all this money for this crazy immersive VR game where there's not going to be as many players or customers buying on PCVR compared to the Quest 3 because they dump so much money in it. That's not very realistic. I would love that, but that's not really realistic. Because of the Quest 3, that I feel like is going to hold back a lot of future softwares and games until Standalone gets a little bit stronger and a lot better, and devs get get their feet wet a little bit more with developing VR games, because it's still very new compared to flat screen VR. Think about flat screen gaming. Sorry, flat screen gaming has been around since the 70s, like 80s, and started booming in the 90s and early 2000s. Like, think about how many decades developers have had to create flat screen games. VR is still very new, still very, very new. So I'm just thinking a little bit more forward into the future, where the Quest 3 right now I feel like is the thing that's kind of one of the things holding us back because of the raw power in it, and the fact that a lot of these developers are just creating cookie cutter games, copy paste. Just because the Quest 3 isn't a super powerhouse, it is still very impressive. It's not like, oh my god, we can create the most graphical intensive game ever. That's not what we need. There are different aspects of VR that are immersive. It's the gameplay loops. It's the things that you can do in there. It's optimization. I mean, VR chat is, what is it? Like, it's very basic, made in Unity. It's not graphically intensive, but it's one of the most popular games out there for immersion because it's practically a sandbox. So there are different ways to get past that hurdle. So I think developers should be a little bit more creative. I know it's very easy to say it, but I think creativity and the variety of the types of VR games that we get, I think we need to shake it up a little bit. I know it's just my thoughts, guys. I mean, they're just thoughts, perspectives, and opinions. Those things will always change as time goes. My thoughts and perspectives are not absolute, so be kind to each other in the comments. Be kind to me in the comments. I want to talk to you guys. If you guys have any different perspectives, please let me know. If I missed anything, I'm sorry. I have to keep this video a certain length. I've already rambled on a little bit too much, but that's kind of where I'm at. I mean, I'm excited for the future. I'm enjoying it, but I do have some concerns. So PCVR and VR is not dead. It's not in a bad place, but it's not in a great place either. So those are some of the thoughts. Please let me know what you guys think below. If you like the video, press like. If you don't, press dislike. It's all good with me. And if you haven't, please subscribe. Take care, guys. Peace.